Hello and welcome to God and the Family, a series where I, Gershly Karen Pierre, speak about biblical concepts and tie that into our population, our families, our communities, and of course, our God, so that we can help make better sense of our place in this world and what I perceive would be God's ideal society for us. Today's scripture will be in Matthew chapter 7, verse 16, and I will focus on the fragment that states, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." I want to focus on that fragment of this scripture, and I want to contextualize it both in reference to what this scripture means, but also tying it into our world, because that is the purpose of this God and the Family series. Let's start with this article entitled, "How Many Trees Are in the World?" by Country Type Year, updated 2023. This was written by Georgette Kilgore, and according to the article, the amount of trees is estimated at around 3 trillion. According to the World Economic Forum, the amount of tree species that exists is roughly 73,300. And according to Home Stratosphere, there are 46 different types of fruit trees. According to Trees Atlanta, trees can live anywhere from less than 100 years to more than a few thousand years, depending on their species. Tying this information into this portion of scripture is to insist that no matter how many trees, the totality, or how many tree species, no matter how many fruit trees, and no matter how long trees live, according to this scripture, you will still know a tree by its fruit. Think of the amount of trees as a condition. Think of fruit trees as a condition, and that no matter what the conditions, there will always be a way to know a tree by its fruit. Because let's say a tree has lived for 100 years as an apple tree. That apple tree will always be an apple tree, whether it's 1942 or 2052. If it's an orange tree, there's no way to change its inner structure to make that orange tree become a pear tree or whatever other fruit trees there are. Also, when it comes to fruit trees, if you were to just look at them before they bore fruit, you wouldn't know just by looking at them which tree is which. So it's the fruit that characteristically sets them apart. And how is this relevant when we think about our world? What are the qualities as a demographic that sets us apart so as to tie us into the Bible? What are the qualities that we possess as a demographic that we could actually learn from the Bible that we're not insisting on today? Because it's one of those hidden in plain sight realities that many people deny. And I've shared my testimony on the subject. In summary, and if you want to check out the video for yourself, I talked about how God revealed to me who the biblical people are. And this was a direct experience inclusive of an open vision. But you can know a tree by its fruit by assessing the biblical proportions of this. In fact, thankfully, my testimony is more than a decade long, but God tied it into scripture. So I'm going to assess certain scriptures and tie that into our population, and you have to ask, are we the people of the book? In Deuteronomy 28, and specifically looking at verse 46, it states, "These curses will be a sign and a wonder upon you and your descendants forever." Notice how it says sign and wonder. A sign is a way to label or give direction to a given location, given fact. Whatever it's pointing to, it gives you information of how to get somewhere. And a wonder is, according to Merriam-Webster, several definitions, including something that provides a feeling of doubt or uncertainty, something that can be a cause for astonishment, something that can make you amazed, something that can actually cause you to feel surprise. It also includes something that is beyond anything previously known or anticipated. So if you are going to be a wonder, you are not going to appear just on a face value vain level to be whoever these people are that the Bible talks about as his. But you have to look at their circumstances, tie that into the greater scripture, and realize, wait a minute, regardless of whether it seems like they would be the people, they are. And that's exactly why they are a wonder and not something predictable, not something you would think you know. For example, which group of people, even within the Bible, were enslaved for most of the Bible? And which group of people were also enslaved for most of their living history? Which group of people have sinned against God so much, God had to allow them to be trafficked all over the world where they were scattered to other nations? Which group of people, even to this very day, are under what would be defined as captivity? And let me give you a hint as to what captivity is. You're not sovereign, you don't have your own systems, you're not even in charge of your own population. I'm talking about a population that's at the mercy of everyone else. You see, the Israelites were not described as people that were powerful, obedient, structured. They were defined biblically as people that would complain a lot, disobedient, always chasing after other nations. Now, looking at us, we don't even look like ourselves anymore. We're always chasing after other nations, what they look like. We want to be that. We want to aspire to everything they are. Which group of people is like that? Whereas when you compare to other groups, fails to have contentment in themselves. Sounds like you're doing the same thing you've been doing, but for some reason can't connect the dots as to who you are historically and biblically. There's more regarding the scriptures, but if you read Deuteronomy 28 in its entirety, you will realize that only one group of people, especially tied to all the judgments pronounced, can appease that. We're talking that particular portion of the Bible talks about high rates of fatherlessness, gender wars, pestilences, diseases, being known by the whole world as something to despise. Which group of people are that? And the reason it's important to know this information is because I believe as we know this information, we can then make amends so that we can heal from the damage that we've anciently caused and fulfill what 2 Chronicles 7:14 asks us to do, which is as a group repenting, as a group turning away from our wicked ways and turning back to who our God is. But as long as we continue to rebel, serve our ancestors, which we're still doing to this day, by the way, which we anciently have done, as long as we continue to do everything but 2 Chronicles 7:14, if it were possible, like the scripture says, these curses will be upon us forever. And I don't know about you, I don't really want to be here forever in this state of being. Which group of people are set to be a permanent underclass? I mean, the list goes on, but you have to ask yourself, why is it that amongst people who claim to believe in God, they don't somehow connect these dots? They don't somehow ask why the position of black people as compared to everybody else is so, bizarre. They don't ask why we were enslaved for all these years, went through extreme abuse, and they don't ask why the world is like this. How come prophets and pastors and teachers who claim to be of God never ask that? How come they claim to see things, but they never see the obvious in front of us? How come they claim that we are not the people of the book, but they don't see the bizarre tendencies of this world? For example, why are you the only people who can't wear your hair texture? It's even against the law for you to actually wear your own hair. And even if it wasn't, why do you wear other people's hair so much? I'm not trying to criticize in a negative tone, but more just asking these simple questions. You have to ask why your own DNA, which you claim God created, which you claim God loved, isn't even valid in this world. You have to ask yourself, what is with the series of contradictions which people pretend don't make up our reality, but in smaller and in larger ways alike make up our whole world? But yet they go to church and they talk about God as if they're seeing the fuller picture, and yet have these cognitive dissonance, contradictions that are actually not of God. So you have to ask yourself, what is it with this world and people not asking the real questions? I find it very bizarre that many believers don't even want to address race. And they don't even think that they should. If you will know a tree by its fruit, then looking at all the circumstances against us, what do you know about this world? What does it tell you about you? What does it at least tell you about the ways of this world? Instead, you would rather believe that anyone who talks about these things is the sinner. You would rather believe that people who talk about things are the ones who are obsessed with it, rather than people who talk about things are trying to make sense of what this world will lie to us constantly about. What is the fear of learning history? You never ask yourself these things? Or do you want to all chalk it up to, quote, sin, not understanding the infrastructural levels of this, quote, sin, and why this sin always conveniently affects you the most? Everybody else focuses on their communities, and they build ministries and center their influence around their communities. You're a demographic who neglects these things while simultaneously begging other demographics to help you. The least you can have is knowledge, but many people run away from that too. Wake up, open your eyes, and ask real questions. Ask God to reveal to you the truth and stop denying things just because it doesn't make sense, because that goes against the definition of wonder. Thank you so much for listening. That's all I have for this episode of God in the Family. Stay tuned for more.